Hi, my name is Mindy Heidenfelter. I'm the coordinator for Presbyterians for Earth Care. I just want to welcome everybody to our webinar, Cool Churches, Cool Presbyterians. And if you'd like to just stay muted through the webinar since we're recording, the recording will be available in a few days for you to access. And so I am going to turn this meeting over to Mark Aiken, who is one of the regional representatives on the Presbyterians for Earth Care Steering Committee, who's going to lead us in a prayer, and then Charmel Roussel, who is also a regional representative on our steering committee, will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Mindy. And if everyone would please take a moment, we will pray for the earth. This from the cry of the earth. Lord, grant us the wisdom to care for the earth and till it. Help us to act now for the good of future generations and all your creatures. Help us to become the instruments of a new creation, founded on the covenant of your love. We ask in Christ's name, amen.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight. Linda K. Smith is wrapping up a 40-year career, mostly as a chemical engineer. She was an engineer for the world's largest petroleum company. And then after that, she made a big switch and went to work for the U.S. Green Building Council as the community director for 4 states in the South Central region. Then after that, in 2021, she was named Director of Sustainability for Central Arkansas Water, focusing on development and implementation of a net zero carbon 2050 climate action plan for 500,000 drinking water customers surrounding Little Rock. She mostly retired last spring, but she still stays very involved. She is a consultant with Metroplan. And so she works on the implementation of a $49 million EPA climate protection grant. She's an ordained elder in the Presbyterian Church. She's a member of Second Presbyterian Church in Little Rock. She's also a board member for Ferncliff Camp and Conference Center. Many of you may have been there. That's a Presbyterian camp and conference center. She's married to David. They have 2 children and 2 grandchildren. So we're so pleased to have Linda Kay with us tonight to speak with us on very important sustainability topics. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Charmel, for asking me, Mindy, for gathering this group together, and each of you for attending. I'm very pleased to be with you tonight, and I'm going to talk about a topic that each of you has some involvement with. You live somewhere that has a roof and has probably heat and air, and you go to a church where you have a roof over your head, and you also hopefully have some comfort climate control there. So I'm going to go through for about 20 minutes and talk about some strategies to keep your church cool. Just a little bit of climate change. I am going to really not do a lot of science and tech, although I'm a very techie person. I'm usually graphs and charts heavy, but I've toned that down a little bit today, and I will be glad to answer questions, and y'all can follow up with me afterwards. I put my email in the chat, my cell phone, and so I really am pleased to share the little bit I know about a lot of building science, and really how each of us can think about the mission of our church and the care of the earth, and how those two work together. And by controlling some of our air conditioning costs, mostly, we have money then for more mission-oriented activities. And so Mindy's going to help me by advancing slides. And Mindy, let's just move right along to the next slide. So I'm going to talk mostly about roofs. I am not a roofer. You heard I'm an engineer, but I've been very involved with the building committee at Second. As an engineer, I get asked to be on a lot of building committees, and I like to do that. I feel like that's one of the gifts that I have, is to help nonprofits look at their facilities and make the best choices when they are renovating or building new. We're going to talk a little bit about ventilation because you can't put a roof on and think you've solved all your problems. We'll talk about scheduling in our church buildings, the importance of trees, and then seasonal activities, seasonal, this says dressing. I don't know what that means, but seasonal activities as far as scheduling within our church property. So next slide. Well, wait, before we leave that, Mindy, go back one, sorry. I want you to look at that roof line that you see here. This is very typical of many of our Presbyterian buildings. They tend to be older. We're not seeing a lot of new construction in the Presbyterian church. We have existing facilities. They have roofs, many of them 100 years old. Hopefully about every 20 or 30 years, you've had to update those and you've made changes and improvements. But right now, I do realize that so many of our facilities are just trying to get by. It's like, can we limp along through the summer months? And the summer months are the hardest time. But what you see here is, I'm going to give you good and bad examples so you can see these as we go through. There's many things I like about this church property right here. First, it has some shade trees that are appropriately sized and distanced from that church building. You see what I think is probably a belfry that has a steeple associated with that. That often helps with ventilation. You have a pretty steeply pitched roof over what is likely the sanctuary. And then you see a number of additions. Y'all all nod your heads. This is probably a lot like the church that you may have attended now or have been involved with in the past. And so the steepness of this roof line really does not lend itself to some of the very white roof techniques that we may have seen in flat roof situations. And so what we need to think about are what materials can we choose and what color of roofs. We're going to put a roof on our churches about every 20 to 30 years. Some of you more often in your climate, some less. It's one of the largest expenses you will have unless you are expanding your facility. And so the importance of each of your involvement with your property ministry, with your building committees, in helping them and maybe advising them and even just asking the question, what color roof are we going to put on? Are we just patching? At the time of a roof replacement, what else could we do that would really help us control our electrical costs? And so next slide, now I'm ready. So why are we really focusing on cooling? First, it's the month of August. I saw where you're from. Most of you are encountering temperatures above 80 degrees Fahrenheit right now. Some of you are at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And the number one expense for most church budgets, and I've seen a lot of them, in the summer, if you don't have a mortgage, and most of our Presbyterian churches are fortunate to not have that, after personnel is the summer electric bill for cooling. And those are only going to increase. And the cost of those bills for cooling really detracts from the mission. If we can control those costs, I can't promise that you're going to bring them down, but if we could stabilize the payments we're making for electricity in our summer months, that would really help our church budgets. Because it does detract from mission when you're worried about, can we get through the summer months, which are distant from the end of the year donations, from beginning of the year pledges? Can we just get through July, August, and September? I've been in a lot of those budget sessions where you're just hope and a prayer and hope that you've banked the appropriate amount of money for the summer. The electric rates are increasing much faster than inflation. I don't know if you've seen your church electric bills, but there is no state in the United States that right now has an electric rate that has not increased more than inflation. Every state in the United States. And finally, as part of climate change, and you'll see some information that I'll present on this, we're seeing an extension of what I would typically have called the summer cooling months. It used to be you ran an air conditioner from pretty much in the South from June, July, August, maybe to Labor Day and a little bit after, but we are seeing the extension of that into both the spring and the fall. So we're having many more days that are associated with cooling than we have in the past, and many more than when the churches were originally constructed. Next slide. So for those of you that have any doubts, and I have worked with a few folks that still have doubts about climate change, this is a graph for Central Arkansas, where I live in Little Rock, Arkansas, from 1895 up to 2024. So this is through the first quarter of the year. This is produced at the Southern Climate Organization, which is a government-based group. This one is at LSU. You can put your own state into the graph and it'll calculate and show you this. So this is a temperature graph. And what you see is what you've seen in the news, probably what you've encountered. We're seeing increasing temperatures over the average line that we've seen historically. And I don't expect that that's going to improve. So we will have hotter months, more days of very warm temperatures. That means more Sundays of the year when you're worried about how cool is the sanctuary. If you have use of your facilities by other groups, daycares, Sunday school, organizations, help groups during the week, like my church does, then you will really have use of your building year round and every day of the week, but you may not have the sanctuary use as often. And so what can we do to address those temperatures and the need for cooling in our church spaces? Next slide. So any of you that have traveled know that historically in the world, there were countries that approached their very hot temperatures in a different fashion than we did in the United States. If you travel in many of the locations in Europe, especially along the coastlines, the closer you get to the equator, what you're going to see is a number of both white buildings and white roofs. And they have really worked on the science of cool roofs. And the science of cool roofs really, for those of you, this is my one slide on science. You may remember if you took thermo and heat transfer like I did, which I loved, so I can talk about it all the time, radiation, convection, and conduction. And so radiation is what the sun is sending through UV rays, infrared rays, a number of wavelengths, and it radiates onto the tallest part of a building, the roof line, and also through the walls into the windows. Then you have conduction, which is how that heat that has come in at the tallest parts or at the walls travels through that building, down through the walls, through what we call the building envelope, the walls, the ceiling, the flooring within there. And then you also have convection, and this is where the old heat rises idea comes from, where circulating air, where is it going to go? This is why in every sanctuary that I go to, all over, not just in the South, but any sanctuary I go to, the choir is always hot and they're always complaining. And they're at a higher level. And sometimes just that one staircase up to a second story or an elevated balcony for the choir is 10 degrees hotter than those of us sitting in the pews. And so I want you to keep that in mind, that you need to take care of your choir members. And then finally, the pitch of the roof is very important. And so when we think about science of it, there is a term called SRI, Solar Reflective Index. And if you were to take one thing away from what I'm going to tell you tonight, it would be at the next time you need your roof replaced, you ask the property minister, your architect, your heat and air company, your roofer, what is the SRI of the roof that we intend to replace this current roof with? I'm not talking about patching. I'm talking about at the time when you've either had enough damage to your roof from weather or trees or whatever, natural disaster, or it's just, you know, you're having so many maintenance issues that you need to replace the roof. At roof replacement, what is the SRI of the roof? And you want something, the number is 100. 100 is good, 0 is bad. This is like a school grade. And so think of what can we do at this time? Because you're doing something that is 20 years in lifespan, probably. Could be 30, that would be excellent. Most roofs that I see, even if they are expected life cycle of 25 years, if you get 20, you're lucky. And this also is coming up now with insurance costs, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Next slide. Mindy, you're doing great, keeping up with me, so thank you. So one of the things that we also think about in cool roof science is what zone of the country you're in, the climate zone. This is like the garden planning zones that many of you are familiar with. You know your planning zone, but you should also know your climate zone. And so really what I'm talking about today is for those of you that are in 5B, 4A, and south. So the middle part of the country and down where we have more days that require cooling. Those are called cooling degree days. Then we do heating. North, pretty much is St. Louis and north, y'all tend to have, although it's changing some, more days that you require heating than cooling. There are some parts of the country that you are so fortunate, you know, San Diego is a prime example, where you have days where you don't require heating or cooling. You're in a moderate zone between 65 and 75. That's a moderate zone, and you may be able to get by with natural ventilation. But really, I'm talking about all of you in the South, Louisville, you're probably in this, Denver, you're in a hot zone right now. I know I have a brother in Denver. And so you need to understand your climate zone, because this will help your heat and air company and your architect. They will have known this, know how to design the proper roof for your climate zone. But all of the zones that I am speaking of, Southeast, Mid-South, Texas, over into the West, you're going to see more need for cooling than you've ever seen it. And it's going to start earlier in the spring, and it's going to go later into the fall than you've anticipated. And so now we need to plan, and we need to look forward to the next 20 or 30-year roof cycle. What is the best technology for today? Because it wasn't always available 10 years ago when you had the last roof. You don't need to go necessarily with the same type of roof you've had before. Next slide. And so this is a very simple graphic. I put it on there. You can look at it. But the types of roofs that most of you have a 3-tab asphalt shingle. That's the most common roof for both residential and commercial that I see, especially small commercial, which is what churches tend to fall into. Some of you are familiar with architectural shingles. In the South, we call those a wind-resistant shingles. They're a little bit thicker. They're a little bit better for trees and wind. We have a lot of tornado activity where I live, and so we get limbs blown onto our roof. So architectural shingles are a type of asphalt shingle that they're a little bit thicker. Then you get into the materials, TPO, EDPM, and PVC. Those are for flat roofs only. When you have a flat roof, you have to do a waterproofing membrane because water will puddle. We call that ponding on top of your roof, and you can't have that because it'll sit there. You'll create a low spot, and over time that'll wear, and then you'll have leaks, and then you're sitting in church with buckets. You can have TPO and PVC with white granules. Some people have sold those. I'm not that pleased with them in my experience. You can have a metal roof. Metal roofs are the most weather resistant. So for resilience, they're a really good choice. They're very pricey, but they're going to last a long time, and they are available in a lighter color. And then you can get into the other roof types: tile, slate, thatch. I'm not going to talk about those. Those are not as common, although some of our churches have them. I was looking at that roof at Fourth Presbyterian in Chicago, and beautiful tile roof. But what we really tend to see are these first categories, and you may see a combination. Your older original building, the sanctuary, may have had architectural shingles or asphalt, but then you may have a flat fellowship hall or addition, and those additions may tend to have flat roofs where you would have a combination of different types. But for any of these, the ability to have a white or light colored roof in your cooling degree day locations, in your climate zones that are going to have a lot of cooling needs, is going to help you. And it can help you as much as 35% if you went from a fairly dark roof, which is a color preference. It just looks good to have a dark roof, especially with brick, which is what most of our brick or rock, or most of our churches are constructed of. To have a dark roof on them looks real good, you know, so what? It's time to move on. We've got to get past that preference and think about a lighter gray roof or a white roof. And I'm going to show you some really good examples to help overcome this, because you're going to have some members that say, no, I got to have a dark roof. It looks best with the red brick. And you know what? There are ways to get past that. But 35% heat reduction through a roof is going to have a dramatic impact on your electric bills. And so that's really what I'm working for, is what can we do to stabilize the cost and use of our electricity and have a very resilient roof that's going to hold up under very high temperatures and hotter conditions. We're going to have more days above 95 degrees, which is very hard on an asphalt roof. They're really just not designed to go much above 150. And so when I say 150, that's the temperature on top of your roof, and your architect or your heat and air or your roofer ought to be able to tell you what the roof temperature is before they give you and sell you a roof. I like to ask architects, okay, when you were up there, what was the temperature? And if they haven't been up there, or they don't tell me what the temperature was the last time they were up there, then I'm passing on them. They're not my roofer of choice. Next slide. So in New York City, in California, and in several other cities since 2010, 14 years ago, there has been a federal incentive program to turn roofs on public buildings white, a white roof incentive. New York cool roofs, California white roof, cool roof programs. And these are especially appropriate for flat roofs in commercial buildings, which for churches may be your fellowship hall or a new Sunday school wing or youth building that you've added. And so for those flat or low pitch roofs, 2 and 12 roofs, bright white TPO or PVC, excellent choice. It's long lasting, can be put down. You can paint over it with a white treatment if you need to. It's easy to patch. The one maintenance issue is that you got to keep it clean. Otherwise, the white reflecting properties of that roof are going to tend to lessen over time. So you got to keep it clean. You got to go up there with a leaf blower and blow it off. You've got to go up there with broom occasionally. And every now and then you may need to use a low pressure pressure washer on it. There are reasons to use TPO, thermoplastic, polyolefin membrane, or PVC. If you have neighbors that are chemical producers, or you have vent hoods from a kitchen, there is a reason to use a TPO over a PVC. So just know that those are not interchangeable. TPO is kind of the lesser of those are the Hondas. PVC tends to be the luxury item, a little bit longer lasting, a little bit thicker typically in the offering, but both of those are available. Next slide. And so if you have a pitched roof, you see you have, you can go black, you can go gray, you can have a red roof, you can have blue roof. I would advocate for a lighter colored roof in every case. If you go with a light gray versus white, you won't get all of the ability to reflect the sun, but you'll get a good portion of it. And so a metal seamed roof in a white or the lightest gray possible is appropriate. I just encourage no church in those southern climate zones to be putting on a black or a dark gray roof at replacement. It's not going to make sense for you. I see that many of you were pleased that I'm going to see Chicago and Earth, Wind and Fire tonight. So I'm showing my age. But for our next generation, my son is a current deacon at our church. I don't want his children to be faced with, why did Linda recommend a black roof? And that's just not what I did. Y'all have heard me, and it's going to be recorded that Linda never said go with a dark roof. Next slide. And so there is some funding available for white roofs, even for nonprofits like churches. And so I encourage you, these are state-run programs typically, maybe federal pass-through money, but your state may have that available, your city or county. It does not hurt to ask. And so who do you ask? Your city, if you have a sustainability office, your county, if you have a PACE program, a property assessed clean energy fund there, or the state will announce. Many of these federal funded programs in the last 2 years with the Inflation Reduction Act and the bill, the BIL, Bipartisan Act, now allow nonprofits and those who have no tax debt to take advantage of programs. And so I encourage you, even if you think, well, I asked about that 5 years ago, ask again, because there tends to be some funding for this. And it may be, which is odd, through your electric company. And so some of the electric utilities have funds available for these clean energy projects, and white roofs, light colored roofs at replacement, or metal roofs may qualify, or a metal roof may qualify under programs available for resiliency based on past tornado or hurricane activity. Next slide. And so it doesn't matter how good your choice is and what great color choice you've made if your roofer does a poor job in installation. And so I would never choose, as an engineer, I would never choose a roofer who had not been in business for the last 20 years. New roofers, I'm sorry. I want someone who is second generation, third generation. Their kids are starting in the business. They're going to be around for 20 years more. And so the importance of your good roofer can't be understated there. It is very important that no matter which product you choose, that you have it installed well and according to the manufacturer's directions. I would ask that roofer, how many of this type of roof, whether you've chosen one of these membrane roofs or asphalt shingles or a light colored roof, how many have they done? I want them to have done 100. 100 is my magic number. That means they're a busy roofer. But in my neighborhood, you know, we had a tornado come through last year, and 75% of my neighborhood has had a new roof in the last year. And so a whole bunch of us use the same roofers because they've been in business a long time, their price was good, they were dependable, and they probably put our roof on last time. And so the idea of staying with a roofer and then calling them back if there's a leak. You want the lead installer to have had a lot of experience with the type of roof you're going to put on, and that you can, the manufacturer's recommendations are followed. And so how do you know that? You can ask them. Well, if we're using this type of roof, who is your supplier? and who's their rep in the area. And if they can tell you that, then they probably can tell you, and you'll get a sense that they really know what they're talking about. Okay, let's breeze on through. Next slide. And maintenance is so important. Everybody's going to have some roof leaks, maybe even the year after you put a new roof on. So get them fixed. Do not let a leak continue. The dirt will degrade your materials. You may have ponding on your flat roofs. You may have a tree fall on it. Whatever it is, get your roof fixed quick, because water intrusion into the main part of your building leads to so many other problems, including mold, deterioration of materials, and structural problems. So let's keep our roofs in good shape. Next slide. I hope that most of you have gone to some kind of scheduling on your heat and air where you can shut off parts of your building that are not in use, and that you are zoned for your use. One of the things that when I worked on the building committee at Second, I said, we have got to get that sanctuary on its own zone, and we've got to get the office and the daycare on different zones so that we can have an AA group meet and not have to run the whole building or the whole wing. Let's be able to zone the use of the building. And then you should have a daily schedule that you set and is followed. And if no one's going to be in that sanctuary from Wednesday night after choir practice, if they use that, except for a wedding, until Saturday morning when you turn it on to make sure that it's cool enough for Sunday, let's let it get warm in there and then cool it down on Saturday. Group your meeting days. Group your meetings into certain parts of your facility. This is a good technique, doesn't cost a lot. Just say, hey, we want you all to meet in this part of the building. You're offering many times your church building for use of others. So try to do that. But while you're doing that, be sure you run enough ventilation. That may just be the fan part of your heat and air system that you control the humidity in your space. Next slide. And so here's some examples. The picture on the left is a metal seamed light colored roof on a very traditional church building. And so there are ways, I'm guessing when this church was built that it had asphalt shingles and they were dark gray. And the one on the right is a very traditional, this is Hendrix College in Conway, where Charmel's from. And they have a very traditional architecture style, but you can see they went to a bright white roof in the middle, and they kept the kind of that traditional college campus look on the ends, but you can't see it unless you're flying over or you go out like I did on that roof and you look at it, and you have to both wear sunglasses and shade your eyes. It's so bright on that roof. So there's your ways that you can do it and still be very pleasing architecturally. Next slide. This is another good example. This is Second Pres Louisville. This is a fine example of what the additions to buildings tend to look like. A combination of flat roofs, pitched roofs. But there are ways here. If I was on their building committee, I would be saying, let's look at whiter on all those flat roofs next time. And let's even look at that pitched roof on what you can see in the back, probably the old chapel and the sanctuary. Can we go lighter? The good things here on the south sides of the buildings, they have trees and they have the appropriate size trees planted. Next slide. And so there are some things you can do if you're not just doing a roof. Between your roof replacements, if you have an accessible attic, and some of you won't with these cathedral ceilings in your sanctuaries, you can actually add this reflective insulation. If you do that, make sure you've done some ventilation upgrades too. You'll need to make sure you have some eave vents and some roof vents. But this is easy to install. This is a good example. What you don't want is to do this because it will help you immediately. and not do ventilation, or you're going to have your Yeti cooler growing mold, which is what you've turned your attic into right there. So be sure if you do this that you think about the ventilation. Next slide. And then other insulation. A lot of you have fiberglass batting. It gets packed down and wet and less than useful over time. Blown in foam has some health concerns, so some people are moving away. And then this one that I've seen used a lot now is old denim blue jeans that are shredded and blown in. Just like you'd blow in foam, they're blowing in a cotton into attic. So the code, your building code will tell you your minimum insulation levels. And if you have a very old church building, you're probably not meeting that code right now. But there are times that you might consider it, especially if you're taking the roof decking off. Think about doing some more insulation and some ventilation and a new roofing material. Next slide. Mini splits, you see these in hotels, in second, third stories, in the addition, over your garage, if you put an apartment in there. These are highly energy efficient. They're ductless. They're easy to add on. I would put a mini split in a church office in a heartbeat, because oftentimes that office is used minimally, unless you're a very large church where you have all staff there all the time. And so you could cool down a wing or a room, choir room, other special use rooms with these. They tend to be pretty quiet, and they have comfort levels that you control without running the whole system for the whole facility. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about ventilation. This is my church, my home church. And from the time it was built, the roof leaked. I mean, the next day, it's like the roof leaked. This roof line is 70 years old now. It's been replaced several times. But what we did about 15 years ago to solve some of these problems is we added a taller Celtic cross and a cupola, not just because it shines at night out to the interstate, because it solved the problem of all of that very steep pitched roof line meeting at once and leaking right in the center of the sanctuary. You can see both the inside and outside, but that was something that it was visual. It elevated the church presence in the community, but it solved the ventilation problems. And we are able to use that also to release so much of the heat that accumulates as the hot air rises up through the ceiling, through this vented addition to the church. So that was new and a great use and a great solution to a problem. Next slide. So I'm going to switch from roofs and insulation and ventilation and talk about some trees. Every one of you should be planting some trees, and you should be planting some trees at your church property. If you can't plant them close enough to shade your roof line, and I'll show you some locations, then you should plant some in and around your parking lot, because you know everybody wants to park under a shade tree. But you can also reduce the heat onto your roof and into your windows by the proper planting of trees. And so I encourage you to plant trees and plant them in the right place. Next slide. So tree shading, I showed this before. Here's a good sized tree. It's getting over part of the roof line. It is also getting most of the windows, and it's far enough away from the actual church foundation that it should not have roof interference. Next slide. This is from the Arbor Day Foundation and Tree Canopy. Reasons to plant trees. I think everybody in this group probably believes this, but tree canopies in our urban areas and even in our suburban areas can help control the heat island effect, which is so causing many downtown locations to be unwalkable at lunch. I mean, I lived in Houston when I first started my job, and we could walk to lunch. Even though it was hot, you could walk. Now I talk to my old friends in downtown Houston and nobody walks anywhere. You take the tunnel underground and because you can't bear to be outside and there are no trees down there. So we need to be thinking about planting urban trees and planting them on our church property. Next slide. So this is, I am not worried about heating right now. I'm only talking about cooling. Heating's another day's topic. Plant them on the south side. You want trees that lose their leaves in the winter, and you locate to shade both the roof line and your windows. That's why this little sketch of a tall tree and a little bit, what I'd call a medium-sized tree, are appropriately sized to shade the roof line and the windows going in. And so this is very easily to do in modeling. Your tree nursery can probably help you in locating this. And then just make sure that you've put them 20 and 40 feet away from the appropriate foundations, if you can get them there. Next slide. We are losing trees faster than we're planting them. And, you know, I'm not talking about tree plantations, which is what we have in the South, pine tree plantations. I'm talking about urban trees here. We need to be replacing our urban trees with those that will survive in our proper climate. So I'm mainly talking about trees native to your area. Next slide. Heat island effect. Let's walk down a sidewalk with some shade trees. Think about pervious surfaces. Think about some light colored sidewalks, light colored crosswalks are another way to consider that. Next. And so I talked a little bit about resiliency. The EPA puts out a risk for your area. And for my area of Central Arkansas, frequent and intense precipitation. That's big time storms coming through that we need to be considering. And that goes into which roof material we need to choose, the most resilient we can. Next slide. And in those same areas, the EPA for each of your states puts out a climate risk that talks about what they expect over the next 50 years. And because I was with the water department, I was worried about having enough water for all of Central Arkansas. And we looked at how much rain. We're going to be warmer and wetter here. We're not like the West where you're going to be warmer but drier, but warmer and wetter across the map that you can see there. And so how do you anticipate and deal with these? And this may be gutters. This may be collection of roof rainwater for irrigation. Next slide. Again, resiliency, have some trees, but know that there is a risk. This one's too close to the church building. Next slide. And so the risk of flooding, you need to think about this. Is your church, where is it located? I would tell you that most of the maps that I see on floodplains and floodways are wildly out of date. And you need to be looking at actual activity and talking to your local emergency groups. Next slide. This is part of my neighborhood last spring when we had tornado come through. There were 1,200 homes in Little Rock affected, and it was scary, and we expect to see more of this. And if you're planning for this, how are you going to accommodate your church, and how will it survive, and how do you keep going, especially if you are an emergency shelter? Next slide. And some southern states inland from the coastline are going to see a population inflow. We are going to see in Little Rock, Arkansas, a population inflow from Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Houston area, because much of that will be underwater with sea level rise. And we also it's fairly cheap to buy land here. Our electric rates are good, and we have adequate water. And so population inflow may have an impact. I know many of you are dealing with decreased attendance and membership, but there may be changes coming over time, especially in the next 50 years. Next slide. So things you can do. your church should be considering each of these. And I know I've seen a number of your seminars and you've talked about these. So I'm going to just have this available as a resource. Let's go next slide. And things you can do at home. Next slide. And that's me. I'm typically the one in the hard hat and looking at the pumps, but I'm also thinking about the roofs too. So I'm going to pause, and Charmel, I can probably do 10 minutes questions if we have any.
Okay, I'm not seeing a lot of questions. I did want to ask you though, everything that you talked about for church buildings, that applies to our homes and office buildings and all of our commercial buildings too, right? So if we're building a new house or putting a new roof on our house, we need to think about all the things that you mentioned, right? It's just not church, it's everywhere.
That's right. That's right. And I hope that each of you thinks about that, this would be a time, if you've had damage to your roof and your insurance is going to pay for a replacement, do not think, well, I have this amount to spend from the insurance company. I would really consider an upgrade to, like I said, an architectural shingle, a lighter color, roof decking, reflective insulation, if you've taken your decking off at home.
So Elizabeth Jackson has a question. Can you paint a roof white, asphalt, tile, metal? What kind of a roof can you paint white?
You cannot paint an asphalt roof. It doesn't work. There are people that can say, I can blow some light colored up there. Yeah. Unless it's a manufactured adhesive, first you're going to void the warranty on your roof, and your insurance company will not replace it if you have modified a roof trying to paint it. They don't like it when you power wash it because you wash off some of the granules too. So please don't paint any asphalt roofs. Your rolled roofs with a membrane can be painted with the manufacturer approved coating material. That's what that New York picture was showing. And your metal roofs, I wouldn't want to answer that. I would just say keep them clean. I really wouldn't want to try to paint them just because I think it's going to wear off and be patchy.
So we also had a comment from Mark about how churches might need to limit the temperature range in the sanctuary to keep some of their musical instruments like organs and pianos and stuff in tune. And I think that is something that churches deal with.
That's true. And so we just did, $2 million organ upgrade, and boy, I'm talking to them all the time about the temperature in there and what can we do, and can we cool the the back section of the sanctuary as opposed to just the whole unit. And what we did was add additional vents back there where we can run the fan portion of the air conditioning system in the back wall where the choir loft is and the organ main components are. And so you have to keep your humidity under control, but oftentimes just air circulation will keep the organ in range. Don't let it freeze, and consult with your acoustical engineer that you may have had involved with your organ installation.
Okay, we've got lots of questions coming in here. I'm going to ask one from Beryl. What material is the most fire retardant? Because fire is a concern in that area.
Yes. Metal roofs are your most fire resistant, and the PVC over the TPO, PVC more fire resistant. Asphalt shingles are not fire resistant. Architectural shingles, just because of the thickness, are going to keep some sparks from penetrating. But if they're not considered fire resistant.
There's some questions about coatings. What do you know about coatings that will extend the life of an older single ply membrane roof without having to replace it? Coatings have a 10-year warranty.
Yes, so that is a good strategy if you use a manufacturer approved material. So typically your TPO and your PVC roofs were manufactured, and all the seams were sealed with a coating, and they oftentimes, like you would a hardwood floor, would allow you to put another layer on at a certain time, but only of the same manufacturer recommendation. And so sometimes you can say, I have a TPO roof. Well, you need to know which manufacturer it was, and then you need to verify with them by an inspection, not just an email, hey, can I do this on my roof? You need to first know what material was installed, that may be 25 years ago, and then you need to go back and make sure the manufacturer would approve it.
I have a question here about the Inflation Reduction Act
Yes.
for energy efficiency upgrades. And I know it's different state by state, but can you just give us some general information?
Yes. Typically, the IRA is allowing energy efficiency upgrades on a per square foot basis. You need to do an energy model. And so that's going to take into account the roof, the insulation, the walls, the envelope, the heat and air, the capacity, and usage of various spaces. If you can run the energy model and show an energy reduction through LED lighting, HVAC upgrades, better white roof, typically there is a per square foot payback allowed. Those are run by your state energy office or EPA or whatever you call your state level group. And so I encourage you to check there.
So can you tell us a little bit about how awnings help keep your building cool?
Awnings are going to help with windows that have quite a bit of sunlight coming in. Typically, we're talking there about either office windows or sanctuary windows. On the sanctuary, very different, because I don't know about y'all, but you may have your sanctuary in use maybe 5 hours a week. And so there are techniques that I would use on an office window 40 hours a week as opposed to a 5 hour a week window. But you can put awnings that can shade. The model needs to be done. The awning company can do that. The architect that you may have had involved with the church can do that. And in some cases, that's very appropriate. There is a maintenance issue with awnings. You don't want to have penetrations that are going to ruin your walls and your brick as you install them. So,
and that's true for homes too, when it comes to
yes.
awnings, not just churches. Okay.
Yeah. I typically would tend to put a good set of blinds inside rather than awnings outside.
Okay. Well, I think that covers.
I've had a
questions.
request to share the final slide again, so I'm just going to pop that back up here.
Yeah, y'all call. I do. I'm mostly retired now, and I have been thinking long and hard about writing a book for churches and building committees, because I just think there are so many building committees do this once, and they have people that may not do this on a daily basis and think about the questions that I would think about. And so I'm considering that. That may be my next project.
We did have one question about heating instead of cooling, but tonight we were mostly talking about cooling because the name of our webinar was Beat the Heat or whatever, but we'll talk about heating another night, because heating is going to be a whole different topic. So yeah, we have recommendations for that too. So anyway, thank you so much. Now, Linda has to go to a concert, so she's going to step away, but we can all hang around and talk about some of the issues that were presented tonight, and maybe do some more Q&A if you want to for another 15 or 30 minutes or however long you have. Oh, I think Mindy's putting up a slide about our next webinar, which is going to be September 25th, and it's going to be about edible landscapes, trees, climate resilient communities, and that kind of thing. So mark your calendars for that, and we'll talk a little bit more about more ways that we can care for the earth. So anybody have any more questions? I'm going to try to look back at the chat and see if I've missed anything. Anybody have any questions or comments you want to make? Did we learn some things?
Yeah, this is really good. I mean, the reminder about lighter roofs is a great one. The challenge sometimes is actually getting, both when we did our home and when we did our church, we were trying to get a lighter colored roof tile than was available. It's like, how much lighter can you get? Sorry, that's as light as we can go. So sometimes you may be limited on materials.
Okay, somebody asked, where is Bruce Gillette tonight? He is our moderator and our hero, and he has had a fall on top of his other health problems, and we miss him very much and look forward to him joining us again soon. And I don't know, Mindy, if you want to say any more about Bruce, but please keep him in your prayers and ask for a full recovery and a quick recovery for Bruce. And Judy asked, will Linda share her slides? So everybody who is on tonight's webinar is going to get a link to the slides, and you can watch the recording again, and you can have access to the resources that she used. So we try to, there's nothing secretive about what we do here. We try to make everything as transparent as possible and share as much as possible. So what else?
We need to make sure we close with prayer also.
Okay.
I don't know that we assigned anybody that.
Jane may be prepared, and if she's not, I can do it.
I am prepared.
Oh,
Okay. Okay, Beryl says, thank you, PEC. Many of us are adding solar panels to our roofs. So yay, a way to go. That's certainly a good thing to hear. Thank you so much, Beryl. Yeah. Okay,
Are you ready for the closing?
I think so, Jane. Thanks.
Okay. So this is actually the lyrics to a hymn called No Hands But Yours. However, the words came from Teresa of Avila, who lived from 1515 to 1582. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things pass. God does not change. Patience achieves everything. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone will suffice. Christ has no body on earth but yours, no hand but yours, no feet but yours. Yours are the eyes through which God sees. Yours are the feet doing good. Yours are the hands with which to bless. Whoever has God lacks nothing. You are the hands, yours are the feet, yours are the eyes. You are God's body. God alone will suffice.
Thank you, Jane. That